The future is watching. Welcome to OpCode Virtual Summit.
And yeah, we are live. Hey Joe, how are you doing?
I'm great. How you doing, man?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks again for joining us. Definitely looking forward to it. We were discussing the other day, so like there is an update for your book, right?
Yeah. So the paperback came out yesterday, which I'm excited about. It's updated a bit and it looks cool. I don't know if you got I'm on video here, but this is what it looks like. It's got the old amber color scheme, the old monitors.
Wasn't it green before?
Yeah. Also,
because I found like a PNG of your book, like not like you're next to you speaking. There is like a copy of the book. It's green, like the one you just saw is orange. It's like, oh, interesting. Is it like for the different version?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
cool.
They always like to make it a little bit different. And its content's updated a little bit. Beto's no longer running for president, and there's obviously been some other events in the past year.
Yeah, like I guess the question now is like if the election are going to be cancelled or not. Like at this point, we don't know. No, I guess. But tell us a bit more about your book for people who are not familiar with it. What are you like basically like covering in it, and
Sure.
why it's also kind of cool to have like some history of like hackers over the past I guess decades, because how long have you been a journalist or reporter for now?
So I've been a journalist for 30 years, but the last 20 have been 20 and a little bit, like 21, 22 have been on tech. And I started covering security pretty much from the beginning. So there are not a lot of reporters that have even covered Silicon Valley for that long. Certainly not security. There are a couple of us, but my last book was kind of a downer. It was called Fatal System Error, and it was about how governments are aligning with organized crime, and the attack surface keeps getting bigger, and basically cybersecurity is hopeless. Even though there was a happy narrative arc in that was the underlying point. And since then, there have been lots of other books that have been depressing about other aspects of security being terrible. And I wanted to do something more positive to sort of keep people who are in the game, keep doing good stuff on security, to keep them motivated and maybe inspired, and for people who are new to the profession, to like give them ideas about which shoulders they want to stand on, like what decisions, sort of collective sentiment by the hacker community have been made before, and why, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so the book is called the Cult of the Dead Cow: How the Original Hacking Supergroup Might Just Save the World. And it's about the oldest surviving and most influential U.S. hacking group. It's still around today, and it was founded in 1984. So one way or another, they've touched all the major inflection points in security and privacy over the last 3 decades.
It's funny you say still surviving. It's true, because a lot of the groups also like disappeared. Like I forgot the title of was it like the Fall and Rise of Sean Fanning, when it was about the Napster thing?
The Napster book,
like
yeah.
If we're talking about the old school hackers, I guess that's one name that comes up to my. Actually, I think that's how we met originally, back in San Francisco.
Right. So my first solo book was about Napster, and one of the revelations in that book that the people didn't realize, despite how famous Napster was, is that Sean Fanning was a hacker, and he was actually in another great old school group that is still around, not quite as old as CDC, called Woo Woo. So I think you're familiar with that. So right, and so like I got to know, when I was writing that book almost 20 years ago, I got to know some of those people, and I sort of stayed in touch over the years, and that sort of got me more and more alarmed about the state of security. And then I sort of went back to them for the happy stories, or like the really cool things that the hacking community have done, including coordinated disclosure, really, really great defensive companies work for the government on offense and defense. The DARPA's fast track grants for cyber, and a lot of activism stuff. So the CDC were most famous, the Cult of the Dead Cow were most famous 20 years ago when they released Back Orifice and other hacking tools that shamed Microsoft into taking security more seriously. But they also invented hacktivism, which is in the news again this week with Anonymous, or people branding themselves as Anonymous, taking credit for some of the anti-police stuff in the US.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, like the anonymous story, I didn't really follow. They just I saw they posted a tweet. People were kind of like not going crazy over it, but like it got a lot of momentum. But like I don't think they released anything or anything in particular, right? They just like took advantage.
No,
of
so
the
I mean, it's
news,
it's sort of classic Anonymous, coyote trickster stuff. It's part marketing and part activism and part bullshit and part hacking. So I have a story out last night at Reuters, which is my day job, about the sort of the resurgence of Anonymous. I mean, I guess the biggest success is they got to be trending on Twitter, at least in the US, for 2 days. The word anonymous was trending, the hashtag. So they claimed credit for a denial of service attack that temporarily knocked the Minneapolis Police Department website offline. They claimed credit for other stuff, which they didn't really do. They were circulating some old passwords from Minneapolis city officials, which had were in Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned site for a while before that. So that was bogus. But there's some bot activity going on that pumped up the mentions and so forth. There's like millions of new followers, new accounts, that's clearly automated, and like a ton of retweets. And like some of the old school anonymous accounts suddenly have these new followers. I'm like, we don't know what's going on. But there was another thing they did for some reason. Like, this is because it's the internet. K-pop fans, there are all these sites. There are these accounts that are very active on Twitter, some of which are automated, some of which are not, that are devoted to Korean pop music. And they started retweeting a bunch of Anonymous and Black Lives Matter stuff. And they actually did one thing, which is tangible, which is that the Dallas Police Department was saying, "Hey, please send us videos show us videos of illegal activity around protests, looking for looters, riots, whatever." And they basically organized a human DDoS, where they said, "Hey, everybody," these Korean accounts that had been supporting Anonymous and BLM said, "Hey, send them music videos or whatever." And so they overwhelmed this Dallas official app, and the app went offline for a while. So something is happening. There hasn't been any serious hacking yet. I've just reported within the last 10 minutes or so that the FBI is looking into the Minneapolis DDoS, but it's a DDoS.
Yeah, it's not really like there's a compromise or anything. Also, like the K-pop thing was connected to the Anonymous in some way. Because I saw some tweets about it today. Like people were talking about one of the hashtag that from the BLM that got whitewash, and then they're like, "Oh, like every time I open that one, I just see a bunch of like K-pop artists." It's like, so that's related because like it's kind of hard to follow what's going on now.
Yeah.
So I have like these filters. Like, is there any compromise or not? No. Okay. Like next year.
Well, so I'll say one thing. I cover, in the book, I talk about the sort of the evolution of activism, and so of course I do talk about Anonymous. But there are advantages that the old school groups like the Cult of the Dead Cow have that Anonymous does not have. So Anonymous has been infiltrated basically from the beginning by police informants, by foreign government agents, and by organized criminals. And so it gets really messy really fast, and it's sort of hard to organize. This time, as far as I know, they're not even using IRC and sort of other sort of organizing tools. So it's all out in the open. Or most of it
probably
is so
using
far.
Discord like us, actually.
Yeah, well, they're not yet, as far as I know. There's no Discord. But CDC was a much smaller group, is a much smaller group, much more cohesive, and they could sort of establish principles and stick to them. And they really worked hard at figuring out what the right ethical call is on a whole variety of issues. Whereas anonymous, anybody can say they're an anonymous, and they are, and anybody can declare an op, and it's an anonymous op, and you can join or not. So it's you lose a lot when it's all diffuse like that.
Yeah, how many members was the CDC?
So about 50 since the beginning, about 20 active at any one time. And one of the cool things about it is that it's still run by one guy. So with their permission, I outed all of the core members who'd never been identified before. So among the more famous members that people already had heard about, Mudge Zatko and Chris Rue were both in the Loft as well, the great Boston, shared hacking space. The guys testified before Congress in '98, and they founded. Chris Rue founded Veracode, a really important now unicorn static analysis company. Mudge went on to DARPA, Google, and is doing other really cool things now. Analyzing code for like sort of safety. So they've done all these cool things, but Mudge had been outed previously. Chris Rue had been outed previously. I sort of outed the others with their permission. And one of them is the founder of the group, who'd never been named before, was Kevin Wheeler, really nice guy, lives in New York. He came up with it, when he was like a young teenager, and he's still in charge now. He's kind of a recluse. And then like the famous one, the one that got me all the media, was that Beto O'Rourke had been one of the earliest members, when he was like 14, 15. But back then it was about text files, sort of edgy text files. It was before, the group kept evolving through, they were like funny and sort of, teenage before they were famous hackers. And so it kept being new blood coming in and old blood going out.
Yeah, I guess it was like the equivalent of like Instagram material back then, but it would be like the text files with like the e-signs and everything. Actually, even like it had been a while, but there was some e-sign that did some comeback. I don't know if you remember like the ZFO e-sign. Like they did like they hacked some famous hackers. Like I would say like. Actually, maybe it's a while. I would say it's between like 5 and 10 years, the last issue. But a lot of those things died. And yeah, same thing with IRC. When it was like still used, at least to like share content, it was easier. Last time we were talking about it with Grok, the problem now is like a lot of those old material is kind of like lost over time. And for instance, like if you look at the Congress speech when the CDC members were like presenting, a lot of the points that they were raising are still relevant today. And the problem is a lot of people like always come up with like similar points later on, not knowing that it had been covered like 10 or 20 years ago. So there's a big failure on the collective on like properly like archiving and documenting like such things,
right.
To continue some more.
There's too much material and it's not organized very well, and everybody's sort of always attracted to the shiny new thing. And I don't think people should be forced to go back and read 20 years worth of Usenet. But that was one of the purposes of the book. I mean, it's actually a fairly short book, and I was just trying to like hit the high points with a coherent narrative thread, so you know what's been done before. That was a big part of this, and in particular sort of like the ethical issues and the sort of and politics, because despite the fact it was a small group, it was actually fairly reasonably diverse in some ways. I mean, they came from different backgrounds, they're interested in different things. Some folks hated the U.S. government, some folks worked for the U.S. government, and it was cool to get like their old chat logs and see where they disagreed with each other and how they came out, because people are not really comfortable talking about their personal ethical decisions, because you're sort of holding yourself up to be criticized or knocked, and it takes some guts to talk about this. Alex Stamos does this. He gave a talk actually before Snowden about at either Black Hat or DEF CON about professionals having sort of an ethical responsibility, in cybersecurity to over backdoors and things like that. And then later he went to Facebook and walked the walk.
Well, especially when your views can evolve over time, like that's one of the things. Like you were saying, a lot of them were still teenagers. It's a bit like that story of that guy who wrote like the anarchist cookbook, and later on he had like to apologize for it, saying, "Well, I think it was like 17 or something. It was like I didn't really like know what I was like talking about," and he realized it's just like following him all his life.
Well, yes. So that's another thing. Another reason I liked writing about these guys is that in talking to a lot of really old school hackers, I mean, before the widespread internet, before like 94, 95, it was I would say it was pretty amoral then, because it was small stakes. And then as like suddenly everybody's online and like your grandmother is at risk, the people the people who stayed with cybersecurity kind of leveled up in terms of morality. They're like, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of fun, but I actually know some shit, and I've got a responsibility to help people. And maybe I'm going to do that in the government. Maybe not. Maybe I'm going to do it in the private sector. Maybe I'll do it my own time. But the people who stayed in, by and large, developed like more, they put more work into developing their own ethical code. And a lot of like new people now who are just coming in. I mean, now it's a respectable profession, so you can go to a nice college and work for a nice company and do cybery things, but not really examine like the moral significance of what you're doing. And that can actually lead to bad things. So in a way, like ironically, the people who grew up breaking the law really, put some time into thinking about what they would do and what they wouldn't do. And you might well disagree with where they came down, but they actually put some effort into it. And that's not done enough anymore. So I think people should make up their own minds, and this might help them, like, talking about this stuff, reading about this stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of ethics, with what's going on now with like the COVID and the Black Lives Matters movement, have you seen anything like, or is anything had been published like in the news like lately, saying that law enforcement is using like contact tracing to like actually like follow protesters or things like that, or not yet?
Right. So there are a lot of interesting things going on, and some of the people involved in it, either were in CDC or learned at the feet of CDC. They're like they're the granddaddies of a lot of this stuff. But some of them are involved with Apple and Google now. Like, so there are very senior security people at Apple and Google who worked for At Stake, which is this great security boutique from 15, 20 years ago that was started by Mudge and Chris Rue and others from the Loft and CDC. And Apple and Google were under immense pressure as COVID, spread, from governments to help with contact tracing, to in particular to have Bluetooth be running all the time, and to fork over personal identifying information about people in case they tested positive. And Apple and Google worked together and said, no, we're going to leave it in the hands of the user. We're not going to be turned into spying devices. We're going to let the user raise their hand to see if they've, confirm that they've been tested positive, and to notify people. And it's going to be based on, who is in proximity if the app was running, rather than, the actual phone number, the IMEI and so forth. So it's like they're keeping it away from the government. Some governments are pissed, but mostly they're falling into line. So in Europe, the UK is still fighting. France and Germany are still fighting. But others that were saying no, we're going to make our own app or whatever, they can't really do it without Apple and Google playing ball, or it's going to be much, much harder to just use the telcos.
But Apple did release an update 2 weeks ago, no? Because I remember 2 weeks ago, we're something having the live stream on the Wednesday, and we're having talking about mobile tracking, and then Sima from the chat actually sent me a link of that new update that was happening at the same time. I think Google did it around the same time. So have we seen any stories of abuse yet? Since there's some protests going on now, or because if I understood correctly, they can be like only one official like application per country, and it has to come from the government. So we haven't seen any like type of abuse on that point, right? Because so the users still have some sort of control on it, right?
That's right, so far.
Okay.
Yeah, it is in the OS now, and so it's good. It's early days, and this isn't black and white. I mean, it may be way less effective. Some governments are saying like we're not going to be able to. Not enough people are going to opt in. It won't be effective. Yada yada. So we'll see. But a lot of people are watching it, and the civil liberties groups, by and large, while not crazy in particular about Google's practices, also faulting Apple in some ways, are pretty happy about this. So if you're rooting for civil liberties positions, then you should be supporting what these guys are doing.
And same thing, still on the same topic. A few weeks ago, you wrote an article about NSO. Can you give us some? And then I think a bunch of your colleagues actually wrote a bunch of stories also on the same topic in that movement. So what's going on with the FBI investigation? Also, because also a lot of them pivoted into like COVID trackers, right?
Yeah.
So, which is a bit ironic. Really there's like this lawsuit, and then you're like, "Oh, we're gonna help you for like your healthcare,"
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So a lot of my colleagues, me, others at other publications have been doing a lot of work on NSO, and it's really interesting. It's like when there's something like COVID, like all these like surveillance companies are saying, "Hey, we can really help protect public health," and then when it's protesters in the streets being terrified about overreaching government surveillance, like those companies don't want to talk at all. They won't return any phone calls. Like, no, we don't know anything about that. It's the same guys. So yeah, my colleagues wrote. I wrote that the FBI is investigating NSO. That's still ongoing. I don't have anything significant new to say about that, except that NSO is also, it was reported elsewhere, trying to get into U.S. police departments, saying, "Hey, we're a terrific tool." So that could be a little awkward. My colleagues at Reuters wrote that NSO, among other like really pretty military type contractors, were using COVID to pitch their value to all kinds of folks all over the world. We got some of the pitch letters and brochures, and it's the stuff is double-edged, and unfortunately, because a lot of what's going on is classified, it needs leakers sometimes to reveal what's going on. But stuff that can hacking tools can be used for offense or defense, and the same is true of surveillance stuff. I think most of the people that I've known for decades on this are not big fans of surveillance for any purpose. And the only way to make sure it's not being used for ill is to not let it be used at all. And so that tends to be where they come down.
Yeah, I mean, I still find it crazy that it's a foreign government selling like surveillance tools to like the US government, like I think that's kind of like the irony of it, And then there is a lawsuit in parallel, and obviously, they probably have some good backup, because were they like asking about like to have like immunity or something at some point in the lawsuit, like to have like if they were like a nation state. There was like this story where like, oh, we're gonna claim like sovereign immunity, and they were like, well, listen, you guys are not a government entity,
So yes, so there's a bunch of different lawsuits in addition to the investigation. So there's some in Israel against NSO, and there's some in the U.S. And in some of them, they say, yeah, well, everything was cleared by the Israeli government, so therefore go away. Anything we do for the government is cool. But the problem is that in other suits, private suits, they're saying, well, if we sold to some government in Africa, it's up to them how to use it. But in other cases, it appears that they're pretty hands-on. So that's one of the big issues, and one of the problems with getting in litigation in multiple venues is making if you wind up making contradictory arguments, that can lead to real real trouble. So I think that's what the antis, the foes of NSO are hoping happens.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because in terms of like foreign interference, I think that's pretty strong, well, Africa, I guess it's like poorly regulated, so like it probably won't get much visibility, especially like in East and West Africa. But the fact, like they still sell to like the US government and there is no local alternative, like if it was like a Russian product, the story will be like completely different. People will start going like even more crazy, like for some reason, like it's not that much.
Sorry about the dog.
Is he barking every time someone say anything about NSO?
No barking. Sorry. Different days working from home.
Yeah, that's fine. But yeah, because in terms of like, and you said there is how many lawsuits are like going on in the US? No, is it only like the single one for like the FBI investigation with Facebook, or is there more to it?
Against NSO?
How
many suits? So
because to be honest, the one in Israel don't really count because like it's like they're gonna get cleared anyway. But like in the US, like there is only one, right? Because it's kind of hard to
so it was really so the big one was filed by WhatsApp, owned by Facebook, and hasn't happened before. I mean, there's never been a major company suing a hacking company for breaching U.S. law. So that's very interesting because Facebook can afford some lawyers. So one of the issues there is was there U.S. infrastructure involved? They have to establish, I think, that I am not a lawyer, but I think they have to establish that there were U.S. servers or infrastructure that were involved, and that NSO was either doing it or knew it was happening, sort of conspiring. So even if it was a foreign government that actually had the hands on the keyboards, if NSO was coordinating it or they were using NSO infrastructure to do it, that looks to me like a violation of U.S. hacking laws, the same way that the U.S. indicted members of the Chinese PLA for breaching U.S. steel. The laws apply. So I think that is the most significant case. We'll see where it goes.
Actually, if anything, I'm kind of surprised that like Apple didn't like join the lawsuit, because at the end of the day, like a lot of the exploits were like targeting like also iOS. And they're known to be like quite aggressive with companies in general. Like they sued like Corlium for doing a virtually like a virtualizer for like mobile phones for copyright infringement or something like that. So it's kind of like surprising they don't actually like sue actual like companies like NSO, just like Facebook did.
I think they're being quietly supportive. I mean, you don't need. I mean, it's a lot to take on, and I think there's kind of a divide and conquer thing. Apple's dealing with Corellium, and I think that's less. I think that has some support, but it's less obvious, and they're happy to let Facebook take the lead on this one. I mean, WhatsApp got hacked, so I mean, there was an O-Day in WhatsApp, so.
Yeah. I mean, the Corlium story was kind of weird also from Apple. Like they tried to acquire them, then they sue them. It's like.
I think that's a very interesting case.
Especially like from a security standpoint, like you probably remember like 20 years ago, like every time, or even was it at Black Hat? Like there's a guy who was publishing like some Cisco exploit, and then like he had to be defended by EFF, and it was one of the first major cases where like. Well, you're like you cannot afford like a lawyer, and then you can get like some actual legal defense. Because at least in the case of NSO, they would definitely be able to afford like legal defense. It goes even like beyond that. But But like you said, like they probably give some like silent support to like the Facebook thing. It will not be surprising.
Yeah. The Cisco case, at where the guy was, arrested at, or they tried to stop his talk anyway at Black Hat. These things also happen every few years, and every 5 years or so, and people don't remember that this has happened before. But it will keep happening. It'll probably happen more. Particularly as there's more nation state stuff, there's more big money stuff. Even if the precedents are fairly clear, if nothing else, it buys you time to try to suppress something. I think eventually the information gets out. But I'm happy that people are much more aware of these dynamics. I mean, when I was writing before Snowden about the 0-day market and the government role in dominating the 0-day market, the official U.S. policy was that they wouldn't even admit that they bought O-day. And now it's out there, and they talk about the equities and balancing the stuff and the White House process, and maybe it's not entirely accurate what they put out, but at least people are talking about it. They understand the issues now, so knowledge increases. That's good.
But in that case, that would still be like the O-day market. Like also a lot of stories were just like security researchers are like, oh, I found this cool stuff, I want to talk about it, I want you guys to fix it, then you like they get sued. Fortunately, that does not happen as much as before. But at some point it was a bit brutal. So we're approaching to the end. I know you have to run for another call after. There is while we're getting some questions from the chat, there is one question from Abiodun asking in these, I guess, to go back to the first part of our conversation, these days of COVID, where we are more inclined to leverage the internet, what is the danger of hacker groups? Is there still like any like hacker groups that are like as dangerous as before, or is it more like nation state, I guess?
Right. So, I mean, this is back to, unfortunately, the everything's getting worse general frame, which is still true. So, I mean, there are lots of kinds of hacker groups. I mean, CDC is basically the good guys. There are other good guy groups. The bad guy groups are much more serious now. As I sort of went into in my previous book, Fatal System Error, the bad guys do capitalism better than the good guys do. It's hard to know how much to spend on defense and what to spend, where to spend it. Whereas the bad guys know immediately what works and they reinvest in it. They're also diversify. So you can have one guy running the botnet and farming it out to others, after he's harvested what he wants to. Somebody else is writing exploits. They differentiate, and they're super good at it. And because they're doing it with almost impunity in many countries, even in the US, the odds of getting arrested are way under 1% for illegal hacking. There's no reason why they're not going to get bigger and better. In the meantime, the attack surface is bigger, gets more complicated, and it's really bad. So there was some hope that COVID was bad enough that the major ransomware groups would stay away from hospitals, and some of them actually said that they would, and that has not been the case. Ransomware attacks are way up. It is blurry what's nation state and what's just money. And then, of course, in some cases, you have nation states that need the money. So North Korea comes to mind. So they're fine with ransomware. It is much worse. And one of the nice things about the good guy hackers is that they have formed groups, volunteer groups, to help defend healthcare orgs. So there's at least two. There's one kind of run by Sophos, and there's another one called the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Intelligence League, which has 4 leaders. One of them is an Israeli. I forget the other two. And one of them is Mark Rogers, DEF CON head of security.
There's 2 Microsoft people actually part of those 4. The disinformation part is pretty active also, especially at the moment.
Yes.
We had Sarah Jen who spoke here a few weeks ago.
Yeah, disinformation is really scary right now.
Yeah,
and it's much harder to combat than straight up hacking, and straight up hacking isn't easy to combat. and then you have all the nation state complications, and within nation states, you've got people politicizing frickin' everything, not just information, but whether it's a good idea to wear a mask or not. So, we're in, dark times. The thing that I want to call out that makes hackers really useful, really great, and more important now than ever before on the good guy front is that by definition, they're critical thinkers. You're looking at a system and trying to make it do stuff it wasn't supposed to, it wasn't intended to do. These guys and the other and the people that have come after them also have one or more moral cause, and they're adaptable. So when the circumstances change, they change too. They learn to get involved in politics, or they learn to, navigate like Wall Street, all the stuff that they didn't have any practice doing in the beginning. So, so can you, so can everybody. And we have like a major worldwide shortage of critical thinkers. And hackers already have a head start in that, so they should be held up as examples of what can be done that's positive.
Good. Before you leave us, any last words?
No, keep passing on the knowledge, yo. There's both technical and sort of philosophical. I think it's one of the cool things about the old school hackers is that it was pretty interdisciplinary back in the day. I mean, people were interested in hardware and software and all this other stuff, and they'd sort of collaborate. And these guys learned to deal with the media and politics too. I think that's important, and it's harder because the field is so big now. People specialize, so branch out a little bit. Read what other people are doing, and talk about the political and ethical issues.
Cool. Actually, we got one quick question from the chat. Is there any upcoming project of a next book?
So it takes me a long time to do a book. I churn them out like once every 8 years or so. Cult of the Dead Cow just came out in paperback, and my job now is getting people to read it. I'm not, I have no other books on the horizon. My day job is doing investigative cybersecurity stories for Reuters. I like that, and maybe something will come up out of that makes me want to do another book. But I have no plans. Thanks. Appreciate it. I'll let you know. I'll be back when I got another one.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you, and also to get kind of a bit of a debrief on what was going on lately. It's getting really hard to follow the news now. I don't know if you guys do it. But
all right.
Cool. Well, talk to you soon, I guess. Thanks again.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.